what a pleasure it is to have with me THRITY UMRIGAR. What a beautiful name to start with.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have written an amazing book called The Secrets Between Us.
That's right.
Now, before we get started with the story and everything, what motivated you to write? Is this the great novel coming out, or are you a person who has always been jotting things down and finally took it out?
Well, this book was about 10 years in the coming. And what I mean by that was it's actually a sequel to an earlier book called The Space Between Us. And ever since Space came out, readers have been requesting a sequel because they felt like they wanted a continuation of the story of the two major characters in that book, which was Bhima, who is a domestic servant who works for a pretty upper middle class woman called Sarah. And while I was flattered by those requests, I had no intentions of ever writing a sequel because I always felt like, well, if I'm going to take the time, I'll write other books, with new characters. And then about 2.5 years ago, in the flash of an eye, in the blink of an eye, I suddenly understood the backstory of a very, very minor character in the original book. Her name is Parvati, and she's a vegetable vendor who makes a living selling 6 heads of cauliflower in the marketplace where Bhima used to shop for her mistress. And the two women had nothing to do with one another. They never spoke. Parvati has 1 paragraph in the original book. But I have to confess that over the years, I used to wonder about Parvati. In the sense of, how does any human being hold herself together with an inventory of 6 cauliflowers? Like, that's just not enough money to stay alive, right? And even though I grew up in Bombay, which is now Mumbai, I grew up middle class. So I didn't have any first-hand experience with that. But that question used to haunt me because the city is filled with millions of people who live such marginalized lives, right? And one day, I suddenly knew Parvati's backstory. I knew what had happened to her in her childhood that not only resulted in her poverty, but also shaped her personality. Because Parvati in this novel is this very crabby, bitter, secretive woman, And the instant that happened, I thought, aha, now I know how to do a sequel to The Space Between Us, but in a way that's new and fresh, by introducing this brand new character into the book, not just telling the same story twice, but now I can put her story beside Bhima's. So now they're both these impoverished, marginalized women, both having secrets of their own, shame of their own, and both who have suffered betrayal at the hands of people that they were close to. There were parallels, and yet they were different. And I wanted to examine both the similarities and the differences between the two women. So that's a long answer, but that's how this book came about. And the minute I knew all this, I think I started writing the book that afternoon, and in 4 months it was done.
Wow.
So I say 10 years, but it was really, the actual work on it was about 4 or 5 months. Yeah.
I imagine it might be difficult to think about a sequel, as you were saying. So if someone's saying, well, I want to know more of that story, and you're like, well, I told that story.
Right.
Now, when you talk about secrets, the interesting thing is you're talking about secrets not just between girlfriends, not just between peers in the office, but people who are different, but they still carry the weight of secrets. And I find that to be pretty universal. If you are, especially for women, many times we are held to a higher standard of chastity, honesty, purity. And secrets that may not mean as much may carry the weight that could crush us. So what made you think about the secrets part?
There's a line in the book that says something to the effect of that more than what we look like, more than the clothes we wear. I'm paraphrasing my own work very badly, but it is the secrets that we carry in our hearts that really shape us as people. And the flip side of that, of course, is that the kind of liberation that comes when you confide in somebody. If you think of, most people are lucky enough to have a best friend, or at least close friends. When you think of your friends, what connects you? In the very beginning, it might be superficial things. You love the same authors, you love the same kind of movies, that kind of stuff. But in order to really gain a true friendship, you have to share some piece of yourself, with that person. And when you do that, you bond with another human being. And that becomes really important in this book, because what ends up happening is that both these women are carrying secrets and shame, but it's not their shame to carry. It's somebody else's shame, but they've made it theirs. And it's only when that realization takes place, when trust develops between the two of them, that they are both unburdened by that.
Have you had people reaching out to you saying, thank you for that, thank you for letting us know it's not our shame just because we've been carrying it?
I get the most amazing emails from readers. Things that just sort of knock you back, rock your world. And I'm always marveling at the fact that perfect strangers feel comfortable enough to write and tell you things about what happens in the book and how it relates to their lives. And that is why I am such a fierce advocate of books and literature, because I feel like we are living in a time when everything else in society, whether it's the media or, God forbid, our politics, everything is dividing us, pitting us against each other, and really breaking us up into smaller and smaller parts. Every aspect of civic life has become that. It is only literature that helps us see what we have in common, which of course is everything, right? There are so few forces that are truly just forces for good, in this world left. And so I cling to books as a way of, like, all the distractions of the world fall away when you're reading, if I may just tell you real quick, I spoke to a group of college students in Miami yesterday. And these are kids, most of whom come from very poor families, and they had read The Secrets Between Us. And so I was mostly, answering their questions about the book. But just before I ended, I found myself saying to them, look, the whole world is going to put all kinds of responsibilities on you. Your professors will say your responsibilities as a student. Your parents will say something else. The only true responsibility you have in this world is to keep that flame that each one of us is born with alive, and there'll be times in your life when there'll be gusts of wind, and that flame will be pretty close to burning out, and it's your job, in fact, it's your moral obligation to yourself to keep that going,
Yes.
And somehow I feel like literature is sort of tied in that process. Books can save lives, they can heal, and I guess this is why we do what we do.
Well, the thing is that you're talking about, with all the division that's going on, I've been a voracious reader and an absorber of stuff. I have to read, I have to look, I have to immediately find out if I see a word I don't know, I have to look it up. But I have been okay, I don't care. I can't take anything anymore new because it's all bad. Right. It's all bad. Right. But even if you have the opportunity to write, as you have been writing, and even if there's something that's not perfect in there, as the reader, I can remove myself from it for a minute, and I can say, oh, that's just fiction, and I can determine how much it affects me.
Right.
I can determine whether or not it has a correlation to something I've done.
Yeah.
I can determine if I will forgive myself because the character is able to forgive herself.
True.
So it has so many opportunities to go full in,
Right.
or to just close it up,
Yeah.
and sit it on the shelf and come back later.
Yeah.
And that is what I love about reading, and I love
great.
that.
Yeah, that's great. I've never ever thought of it in that sense, but you're right. That distance between the book and the reader is for the reader to decide, and there is a kind of comfort in that,
But even so, when you talk about these women and they're like, you have something that's told and there's a consequence of telling it,
right?
But that is brought out, and that they are able to do something with that is really good, because we have too many divides. I love that. See, now I have to go back and read the first book because I haven't read it. And then,
well, I wrote the second book deliberately so that I didn't assume that everybody who would read The Secrets would have read The Space Between Us, So I wrote it where if somebody picks up the second book first, it's a complete book. It will still make, I make enough mentions of the plot of the first one, so it feels pretty seamless. So in that sense, you're fine to have only read. But I do hope that.
Oh, but I want to now. I want to, right? Yeah. So I have discovered you, and so therefore I must discover your work.
Thank you.
Do you think that, not knowing that we are people in the U.S. in general who don't have a good grasp of the world, we are very insular in our big nation and our belief in, we have the best and don't need anything else. I think this helps by opening up the possibility of being transported into another culture and getting to see some things. Yeah. Because I guess my knowledge has been enhanced by seeing you weave a beautiful tapestry where I can look through and see, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about it that way. I didn't think about life that way. Maybe I'm only thinking about the untouchables and the wealthy. We just get such poor ideas of cultures from movies and things.
I do. I have to tell you that I feel a certain joyous obligation. I see my books, hopefully at their best, as being a kind of ambassador and opening doors and windows to different worlds. And the fact is, even though I write often specifically about India, not all the time. I have a book called Everybody's Son, which is about race relations in the U.S. Black characters, white, not a single Indian character in that book. But I'm drawn to subject matter that I think is universal. The Space Between Us, basically, the first book, is a story of domestic help and the relationship, and perhaps even the unlikely friendship that develops between the mistress of the household and Bhima, the domestic servant. Well, go back 50, 60 years and set that book in the American South. Yeah. And it works, it aligns perfectly. Yes. In fact, when Space Between Us came out, Alice Walker just happened to pick up a copy and sent my publisher an unsolicited blurb for that book. I mean, she was just so generous with her time. And she then hosted an event for me in the Bay Area where she lives. And we were sitting, I was like in a fog, I kept thinking, Alice Walker is sitting on a couch with me and she's holding a cup. Right. Well, turns out that when Alice Walker was a little girl, her mother was a domestic servant in the house of a, affluent white family, right? And I won't share with you some of the very emotional things that Alice Walker said about that experience and how it still lingers and her memories of that. And I thought, okay, so it's not so much about my book, it's just that it hit, it tapped a responsive chord
into the heart.
Into the heart. But, these things are universal. As much as we like to pretend that we in the United States, are a planet, not just a country. That's true.
A solar system.
Exactly. We are part of planet Earth.
Yeah.
And like it or not, what happens, especially now with climate change, God, if that doesn't teach us that it's one unit, what will,
I don't know. It's interesting that you talk about the thing with Alice Walker on one. For those of you who don't know who Alice Walker is, please go read.
Yeah.
But same thing for me. And I'm of the age where my mother and my grandmother